The sun had barely begun to rise over Santa Monica, but the volunteers at the Emergency Relief Center were already hard at work. Smoke from the recent wildfires still lingered in the air, a faint but bitter reminder of the devastation that had swept through Los Angeles just days before. Families who had lost everything huddled under makeshift tents, their eyes reflecting exhaustion and uncertainty. Inside the bustling center, stacks of donated supplies lined the walls, cases of bottled water, boxes of canned food, bags of clothing. Volunteers moved quickly, distributing necessities to those in need. Amid the organized chaos, a woman stood quietly, tying her hair back into a loose ponytail. She wore simple jeans, a faded gray hoodie, and sneakers that had seen better days. With no makeup and a baseball cap pulled low over her face, she blended in seamlessly. But even dressed in the most unassuming attire, Sandra Bullock could never truly go unnoticed. She had arrived at the relief center at dawn, eager to help. For Sandra, this wasn't about publicity or making headlines, it was about doing something real. As she carried a crate of bottled water toward the distribution tables, a volunteer near the entrance paused, his eyes narrowing. His name was Greg Donovan, a mid-level coordinator at the center who had been working tirelessly since the fires started. He prided himself on efficiency, on keeping things running smoothly. And in his mind, there were two types of volunteers, those who came to help, and those who came for attention. And he was convinced Sandra belonged to the latter. Greg nudged his coworker, Lisa, and muttered under his breath. "You see her? What's she even doing here?" he scoffed. "I swear, these celebrities just show up for a photo op and then leave." Lisa frowned. "I don't know, Greg. She looks like she's actually working." "Please," Greg snorted. "You think she's gonna get her hands dirty? Give it an hour, she'll be gone before lunch." Sandra, oblivious to the judgmental whispers, kept moving. She set the water down and immediately turned to grab another load. She had no interest in special treatment. She just wanted to help. But Greg wasn't done. As Sandra passed by, he called out, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Hey there, sweetheart. You sure you're in the right place?" Sandra stopped, blinking at him. "Excuse me? I mean, this is a volunteer center, not a red carpet," Greg said with a smirk, gesturing at her casual outfit. "People come here to work, not to take selfies." For a moment, Sandra just looked at him. She had dealt with this before, the assumptions, the condescending remarks, the belief that fame and sincerity couldn't coexist. She could have snapped back, could have put him in his place with a single sharp remark. But instead, she smiled. A calm, quiet smile. "Well," she said, adjusting her baseball cap. "I guess I better get back to work, then." And with that, she walked away. Greg shook his head, chuckling under his breath. He had seen this before, celebrities who thought they could play humanitarian for a few hours before slipping back into their million-dollar homes. He wasn't buying it. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sandra wasn't alone. And the man who had just stepped into the relief center, wearing a plain black jacket and scuffed boots, was about to change everything. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the relief center as volunteers moved in every direction, carrying supplies, organizing donations, and offering comfort to displaced families. The air smelled of smoke and damp earth, a lingering reminder of the wildfires that had torn through Los Angeles just days before. Sandra Bullock, unfazed by Greg Donovan's earlier remarks, kept working. She wasn't here for validation. She wasn't here for applause. She was here because people needed help. With steady hands, she unloaded another box of canned food onto the supply table. She had lost count of how many she had moved. It didn't matter. All that mattered was keeping the line moving. Greg, however, still wasn't convinced. Leaning against a stack of bottled water, he watched her with skepticism, his arms crossed. "She's still here," he muttered under his breath. Lisa, standing beside him, gave him a pointed look. Maybe because she actually wants to help. Greg scoffed. Give it time. These people always have an exit plan. Before Lisa could argue, a murmur rippled through the center. A few volunteers glanced toward the entrance, then did double takes. Others whispered excitedly. A woman nudged her husband, pointing toward the door. And then, as if the energy of the room had shifted, Greg turned to see what the fuss was about. A man had just walked in, dressed simply in a black jacket, dark jeans, and boots that looked like they had seen miles of pavement. His dark hair fell just past his shoulders, and his quiet presence carried an undeniable weight. For a moment, Greg didn't recognize him. But then the whispers grew louder. Is that? Oh my God, it's Keanu Reeves. No way. What's he doing here? Keanu walked with his usual understated grace, his hands tucked in his pockets, his kind eyes scanning the room. He had been in Los Angeles when the fires broke out. And just like Sandra, he had come here to help, not for attention, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Sandra, still working at the supply table, looked up just in time to see him approaching. A slow, surprised smile spread across her face. Keanu? He grinned. Hey, Sandy. Thought I might find you here. Sandra let out a short laugh. And here I thought I was the only one who snuck in without making a scene. Not much of a scene yet, Keanu said, glancing around. Give it time. Greg watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. First, Sandra Bullock. Now Keanu Reeves. What was happening? Lisa elbowed him. Still think she's here for a photo op? Greg didn't respond. Keanu grabbed a pair of gloves from the supply bin and turned to Sandra. Where do you need me? She nodded toward a pile of donation boxes. We're unloading these and sorting everything by category. Food over here, clothes on that side, hygiene products near the check-in tent. Keanu rolled up his sleeves. Got it. And just like that, the two Hollywood stars fell into rhythm with the rest of the volunteers, lifting boxes, handing out supplies, and offering a helping hand wherever it was needed. Greg stood frozen, watching them. He had expected Sandra to flake. He had expected her to quit after an hour. But now, not only was she still here, she had backup. And for the first time that morning, Greg started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. Hours passed, and the relief center buzzed with activity. Volunteers rushed between tables, handing out supplies, comforting families, and doing their best to restore a sense of normalcy. Smoke still lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of donated clothing and fresh coffee brewing in the makeshift break area. Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves worked tirelessly, blending seamlessly into the team. If anyone expected them to take breaks, pose for photos, or demand special treatment, they were quickly proven wrong. Keanu, sleeves rolled up, lifted heavy crates without complaint, carrying them from the trucks to the sorting area. Sandra moved between families, handing out essentials with a warm smile, offering quiet reassurance to those who had lost everything. Greg Donovan had been watching all of it. And though he didn't want to admit it, something about the scene unsettled him. It wasn't just that Sandra and Keanu were still here. It wasn't just that they were working harder than some of the other volunteers. It was that, they actually seemed to care. It didn't make sense. They were Hollywood stars. They had million-dollar homes, stylists, red carpets. Why would they choose to be here, covered in dust, sweating under the California sun, when they could be anywhere else? It gnawed at him. Greg had spent years running relief efforts. He had seen his fair share of celebrity volunteers, people who showed up with cameras in tow, posed for a few pictures, and then disappeared, never bothering to get their hands dirty. So what was their angle? The breaking point came when Greg overheard a conversation near the supply station. A young mother stood by the clothing tent, cradling a toddler in her arms. She looked exhausted, her clothes stained with soot. She held a small jacket in her free hand, hesitating. Sandra, noticing, stepped forward. "That looks like a good fit for your little one." The woman sighed. I don't want to take more than we need. There are so many others who lost just as much." Sandra's expression softened. "Hey, that's what we're here for. If it'll keep your kid warm, then you take it. No second guessing." The mother's eyes welled with tears. She nodded, hugging the jacket to her chest. "Thank you. I don't know how to." "You don't have to," Sandra interrupted gently. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" Greg clenched his jaw. This was too much. He stormed over, unable to hold back any longer. "All right, what's the deal here?" he demanded. Sandra turned, blinking at him. "Excuse me. You show up out of nowhere, and suddenly you're the hero of the day." Greg crossed his arms. "What is this, some kind of PR stunt?" Nearby, Keanu paused, setting down a crate of supplies. His eyes locked onto Greg, calm but sharp. "Greg," Lisa hissed, stepping forward. "What are you doing?" "I'm saying what everyone's thinking," Greg shot back. He gestured between Sandra and Keanu. "They waltz in here like they're one of us, but when this is over, they'll go right back to their perfect lives while the rest of us stay behind and do the real work." A heavy silence fell over the area. Volunteers stopped what they were doing, eyes flicking between them. Sandra exhaled slowly, adjusting her baseball cap. "You think I don't know that?" she said quietly. Greg hesitated. "I know I get to go home at the end of the day," she continued. "I know I have a roof over my head when so many people here just lost theirs. And yeah, I know people like me don't always stick around when the cameras aren't rolling." She took a step closer, her voice steady. "But you don't get to tell me why I'm here." Greg opened his mouth to argue, but Keanu spoke first. "You're tired," he said simply. Greg flinched. "What? You've been doing this for days, maybe weeks. You're exhausted, frustrated, angry." Keanu's voice was level, but there was something in it that cut through the tension. "I get it." Greg's hands curled into fists at his sides. "But don't take it out on the people who are trying to help," Keanu added, his gaze unwavering. The silence stretched. Greg's chest rose and fell. His mind raced for a comeback, for some way to regain control of the conversation. But all he could see was Sandra, standing in front of him, dirt on her jeans, sweat on her brow, her hands still trembling slightly from carrying boxes for hours. And he realized. She wasn't here for show. She was just, here. Greg swallowed hard. He turned on his heel and stalked away. Lisa let out a slow breath. "Well, that was something." Keanu gave Sandra a look. "You okay?" Sandra smirked, rolling her shoulders. "He'll come around." Keanu chuckled. "Yeah. I think he just might." The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a golden glow over the relief center. The once chaotic scene was now a more controlled effort, supplies had been sorted, families had received the essentials they needed, and volunteers moved with steady efficiency. The exhaustion of the day weighed on everyone, but there was also a quiet sense of accomplishment in the air. Sandra Bullock wiped the sweat from her forehead with the sleeve of her hoodie. She was sore, her legs ached from moving boxes all day, but she felt good. Really good. She glanced over at Keanu, who was kneeling next to a little boy, helping him lace up a new pair of sneakers from the donated pile. The boy grinned up at him, and Keanu returned the smile with his usual warm sincerity. Nearby, Lisa nudged Greg. "Still think they're here for a photo op?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Greg let out a slow breath. He had spent the last few hours avoiding Sandra and Keanu, trying to sort through the frustration bubbling inside him. He had been so sure, so convinced that they were just another pair of celebrities passing through for good press. But the proof was right in front of him. They weren't here for the cameras. They weren't here for praise. They were just here. Greg sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. Then, with some reluctance, he walked toward Sandra. She was taping up a broken box when she noticed him standing there. She arched an eyebrow. Coming to accuse me of something else? Greg exhaled sharply. Look. I was out of line earlier. He shifted uncomfortably. I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions. Sandra studied him for a moment before shrugging. You were just doing what you thought was right. That's not an excuse. Greg shook his head. I let my own stress cloud my judgment. Truth is, we don't get a lot of people like you around here. It's hard not to be skeptical. Sandra leaned against the supply table, crossing her arms. Fair enough. But I meant what I said, I'm not here to prove anything. Just to help. Greg nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. So, you coming back tomorrow? Sandra smirked. I don't know. Depends. Think I can handle another day of your charming personality? Greg let out a short laugh. I'll try to keep my insults to a minimum. Keanu walked over, dusting off his hands. Did I miss something? Sandra tilted her head toward Greg. He just admitted I'm not a complete fraud. Keanu grinned. Took him long enough. Greg rolled his eyes, but there was no real heat in it. Just then, a woman approached, a clipboard in her hands. We've got another supply truck pulling in. Could use some extra hands unloading. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a look. Then, as if in perfect sync, they both turned to Greg. You in? Sandra asked. Greg exhaled, shaking his head with a smile. Yeah. Let's go. As they walked toward the truck, the last rays of sunlight casting long shadows across the ground, something had shifted. Greg had started the day believing that class was about appearances. About status. About proving your worth. But now, watching two of the biggest stars in Hollywood haul supply crates alongside everyday people, he realized the truth. Class wasn't about money or fame. It was about showing up. And today, Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves had done exactly that.